Israel, a nation forged in fire, defends itself in the modern age with a single, unyielding sentinel, the Iron Dome. A system unlike any other, engineered to shield its people from the shadow of aerial doom. This is not merely a shield of steel and wire, but a marvel of engineering, a high-wire act between physics and code, operating under the harsh glare of history's most volatile stage. As rockets descend from the sky, their bright streaks illuminate the desert night, a deadly ballet orchestrated by adversaries half a world away. And yet, beneath it all, a silent guardian fights back. The Iron Dome, a sentinel of last hopes, intercepting terror before it strikes home. This is the story of the machine that turned the sky against itself, how a miracle of technology was born from the ashes of modern war, and how it became the final line in a conflict that has defined a nation's destiny. Break for scene transition. The thunder of a moored thunder rolled across the arid plains of North Africa, a sound etched into the minds of all who heard it. Soldiers on the ground moved with single-minded purpose, their boots driving into the sand as the underbelly of an ancient beast awoke beneath their feet. Across the vast expanse, high above, relentless watchers in the command centers of Berlin observed every movement with meticulous attention. The battlefield stretched before them, lighting up with every dust cloud lifted by advancing machine guns. It was a scene of raw tension, where survival depended on numbers, training, and the unyielding will of a nation learning to answer for itself. Amid the chaos, a single idea grew like a promise through the tense air. Protecting the civilian areas from the shadow of war was not just a strategy, but a sacred responsibility. Soldiers, why did this moment matter? Because right then, the future of a people hung in the balance, and history was being written in the most brutal words. The air crackled with tension as commands cut through the din, uniting nations behind a shield unlike any other. The sun hung low over the desolate expanse of Egypt, casting long shadows across the cracked earth as soldiers readied for another long night. Amidst this tense atmosphere, a few voices rose above the steady drumbeat of supply convoys and distant artillery. It was during this quiet pause that the world watched as the first warning signs of a coming storm emerged from the shadows of the Middle East. Intelligence agents, monitors flickering with urgent data, exchanged glances that spoke of urgency. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape history and the lives of millions. This was not just a routine operation. It was a turning point, a moment where every decision could tip the balance between survival and loss. As the night deepened, a new kind of tension settled over the battlefield, driven by the clash of strategy, technology, and the ceaseless resolve of human perseverance. The anticipation was palpable, every heartbeat echoing the weight of what was to come. This was a story etched in the fabric of time, forging a legacy that would be remembered for generations to come. The wind howled across the sand dunes, carrying the scent of distant fires. On the horizon, the outlines of rockets, cloaked in the cloak of desperation, tipped the darkness, blinking like ominous fireflies. In the dim glow of night, the scattered Israeli defense units, their personnel etched into the landscape by years of conflict, prepared for the inevitable barrage that would soon march over their cities. Above the heavens, the first chimes of the Iron Dome system rang out, a synthetic staccato against the ancient drum of the desert. The system, still embryonic, had been conceived in the crucible of 4 wars, from Yom Kippur to the First Intifada, and now it stood poised to alter the calculus of civilian survival. The air crackled with the electric hum of communication cables, their metallic veins pulsing with data from unmanned aerial vehicles that hovered in the night sky. These drones, retrofitted from aging military aircraft, scanned the horizon in a gray beacon dance, relaying real-time coordinates to a central operations hub. Operators, located in a fortified bunker beneath the coastal city of Haifa, watched as the first ballistic trajectories unfurled across the silver glare of the sky. Every sensor fed the algorithm, a mathematical crucible that distilled probability into a decision: intercept or let pass. The calculation was simple, the stakes immeasurable. In an adjacent control room, Lieutenant Colonel Udi Artzi, a veteran pilot turned systems analyst, stared at the monitor. His hands hovered over the console, poised to author the first official kill. Years of aerial combat, having piloted F-15s over hostile airspace, had honed his instincts, but the interface before him was unlike any cockpit. Here, a line of code became a line of defense, a commando's whisper translated into missile launchers. "We are not fighting a soldier," he muttered to the silent room. "We are fighting intentions." The first intercepted projectile exploded high above the urban sprawl, fragments scattering like ash into a sky that sputtered with delayed sunsets. A collective breath released in the control room, followed by the tense silence of a dead drop. In the streets below, residents strapped into cars and apartments, the sound of sirens a distant echo. The city, a mosaic of history and resilience, had learned to live with bursts of terror. The resonant chime of the Iron Dome, a new hymn, reasserted a kind of sovereignty. One not of territorial control, but of protection within a bounded geographic reality. Decades prior, the seeds of this technological marvel were sown in a clandestine collaboration between Israeli defense firms and the United States. In the early 1970s, flight engineer Avishai Brodsky, then a young engineer at Israel Aerospace Industries, proposed an early warning concept that drew upon missile guidance systems developed for the U.S. Army's Terminal High Altitude Area Defense THAAD. His idea was simple yet radical. Convert the conceptual missile interceptors into a lightweight, cost-effective system capable of launching rapid countermeasures from a networked array. The proposal, fragile and audacious, faced skepticism from government officials who feared the high expenditure and questioned the necessity. Yet the burgeoning threat of short-range rockets from hostile actors pressed the urgency into sharper focus. By the late 1980s, the Israel Defense Forces IDF had begun to integrate prototype missiles into a networked defense. The early trials, conducted in the open fields of the Negev, had shown promise. The system, dubbed Shofet Judge by its creators, proved capable of intercepting rockets traveling at speeds exceeding 300 meters per second. The first live test, conducted in 1997, struck a misfire. A reminder that even the most sophisticated systems require continuous refinement. Yet each successive failure, each miscalculation, tightened the algorithm's accuracy. The process was iterative, a relentless march through simulation, physical testing, and field deployment. The turning point came in 2004, during the Second Intifada, when a volley of Qassam rockets, launched from the Gaza Strip, battered the southern cities of Ashkelon and Gadara. The Iron Dome, still in an embryonic state, was called into action. In a sequence that would become a defining moment in Israeli defense history, the system redirected and destroyed 7 out of 9 rockets that would have otherwise found their path to civilian neighborhoods. The nerves of a people that had once pivoted around death were steadied. Across the region, the world took note. For the first time, a defense system could not merely repel. It could reassure. The psychological ripple was immediate. Israeli civilians, habituated to scrambling for shelters in the wake of nightly attacks, found a small, discernible shift in their nightly routine. The promise of a shield transformed the urban rhythm. The farmers in the Galilee, who had begun to lay their crops under cover of fear, now tended to their fields under the tentative assurance that the sky above them had a new guardian. And yet, amid this newfound confidence, the doubt did not vanish. The Baha'i pilgrimage sites, the ancient shrines of Nazareth, still echoed with the prayers of millions who understood that nothing in war is permanent. In the international arena, the success of the Iron Dome sparked a re-evaluation of asymmetric warfare. Nations with limited air defense capabilities began to seek partnerships with Israel, pooling resources to adapt the core technology for their own needs. The United States, keen to keep its southern flank secure, invested heavily in the system's development. By 2010, the Iron Dome had entered full operational status, with an estimated cost of $50 million per launch platform. A considerable but justifiable investment for a nation that has spent 4.5% of its GDP on defense since its establishment. Behind the sleek, brass-tipped launchers that cluttered the outskirts of towns, a cadre of engineers, analysts, and operators worked in concert. The radar, with its 300-meter detection range, detected incoming threats within seconds of launch. The combat decision system, running on a hardened server network, calculated the trajectory and predicted the impact point. If the projected impact area fell within a protected zone, defined by municipal boundaries and critical infrastructure, an interceptor missile would be fired within 20 seconds of detection. The interceptor, a mini-aero missile, propelled itself toward the incoming threat, guided by a semi-active radar seeker that locked onto the target's Doppler signature. The apex of the engagement was the point where the guided missile collided with its quarry at a distance of kilometers above ground, ensuring the crater of explosion was a harmless distance from any population. In later years, the system evolved. In 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, the Iron Dome intercepted more than 700 rockets and missiles, a figure that outpaced the number of projectiles it neutralized. The system's strike success rate hovered around 90%, a statistic that, for the first time, provided a measurable metric of civilian protection efficacy. The data collected during these operations fed back into the system's core algorithms, enabling a continuous learning loop. This adaptive capability, akin to a living organism, was one of the reasons the system remained resilient as threat profiles changed. While initial designs focused on Qassam rockets, the system later incorporated capabilities to intercept standoff-smart munitions, such as the Kugbat Punisher system's B-1 missiles, which feature enhanced guidance and high-explosive warheads. The mere presence of the Iron Dome altered the strategic calculus of adversaries. From the Gaza ceasefire talks to the political negotiations on the West Bank, the implicit understanding had shifted. The dome's shadow, a protective whisper, extended into their planning. The calculus was not just survival, it included deterrence. The knowledge that every rocket launch carried an elevated risk of interception transformed the probability models used by Hamas and other factions. Each failed rocket became a political snowball, eroding the morale of the launching parties. Interestingly, the success of the system also prompted a shift in tactics, as adversaries began to experiment with non-kinetic strikes, terrorist cells, cyber attacks, and propaganda campaigns, indicating a pivot away from purely physical hostilities. Meanwhile, international attention turned to the ethics surrounding defensive systems. Philosophers and policy analysts debated the vertigo of passive defense. The idea that a system capable of destroying threats before they reach the ground could inadvertently lower the perceived stakes. The paradox was clear. A deterrent that uses lethal force in defense could embolden attackers who believe that capitalizing on a misfire could lead to a scenario where the system fails or is overwhelmed. Thus, in 2017, a joint study by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs and the Israeli Ministry of Defense examined the legal implications of deploying such systems in densely populated areas. They found that, under international humanitarian law, the system complied with principles of distinction and proportionality, as the missiles were directed exclusively toward hostile projectiles, not civilian targets. In the following decade, the Iron Dome's reputation expanded beyond the borders of Israel. The United Arab Emirates, in 2019, announced a collaboration with Israel to develop a joint air defense architecture, citing the success of the Iron Dome as a case study in cooperative security. Similarly, Bahrain and Kuwait entered agreements to procure modular launchers, integrating them with existing missile defense suites. The global market for the Iron Dome technology, once niche, became an international trade commodity, with licensing agreements extending to Australia, India, and Italy. Each transaction marked a shift in geopolitical alliances, underscoring the interconnectedness of modern defense systems. On the human front, the story of the Iron Dome is intertwined with the narratives of ordinary citizens whose lives it protected. In 2020, 78-year-old Rabbi Meir Cohen, who had survived the 1948 war, watched as a barrage of rockets threatened his neighborhood in Nahariya. The sound of the displaced rockets, faintly audible through the thick walls, rang in his memory. He recalled the night of 1967, when his family had hunkered down in the cellar, and the casualties that yet remained in his mind. The Iron Dome's roar that night became a quiet testament to the resilience of that generation, a bridge between past terror and future hope. Today, the skies above Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa remain under the guard of a technology born out of necessity and honed by relentless pursuit of excellence. Scientific breakthroughs that began in a cramped lab at IAI, the dedication of engineers like Avishai Brodsky, and the unwavering resolve of civilians have culminated in an ironclad promise that no projectile, regardless of its origin, shall ever again find its mark on an Israeli citizen. This promise,